Welcome everyone, and welcome to this virtual panel discussion on our new Career Progression Fellows. My name is Chris MacDonald. I'm the Head of Research at Pancreatic Cancer UK. I'm joined today by Michelle Garrett, who is our Chair of the Scientific Advisory Board and Professor of Cancer Therapeutics at the University of Kent, as I remembered correctly, and also visiting Professor of Cancer Therapeutics at the ICR. We're also joined by Seth Koffelt, who is a group leader at the Beaton Institute in Glasgow and also one of our members of the Scientific Advisory Board. And we're also joined by Simon Vincent, who's the Director of Research at Breast Cancer Now, and in a past life has also worked with the fellowship, head of the fellowship programs at Cancer Research UK. Welcome and thank you all very much for joining me today. So before we pick the brains of our esteemed panel members, I just wanted to briefly talk about why we're here today, which are the Career Progression Fellows. So our Career Progression Fellows, no, not, I'm going to start with saying some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A. If you put any questions into the comments, we may not see them. So please remember to put any questions into the Q&A. We're recording this, so if you need to go for any reason or you want to review anything or share them with colleagues and peers, please do so. We'll send all the recordings to you afterwards. Housekeeping remembered, tick. So where I get back to was the Career Progression Fellows. So these are £300,000 awards for 3-year durations to researchers who currently do not have a permanent or fixed term position in a UK host institute. So these are for people who are not fully independent principal investigators or group leaders and are really looking to establish themselves and make that transition away from postdoc into the world of being a group leader. So essentially, you should have a significant postdoc experience, contributed significantly to the world of pancreatic cancer research, and you're looking to make those first steps out of your current postdoc position and looking to move into the world of being a principal investigator and group leader, or really cementing yourself in that world, becoming one of the groups that will lead the progression of early detection and treatments into the future. So crucially, these are pretty flexible. We designed the Career Progression Fellows and the Career Foundation Fellows, which are an earlier stage fellowship support mechanism, to be intentionally flexible. So there's obviously those key criteria of 300,000 for 3 years, but we really put the emphasis on the applicants justify why they believe they are right and justified for applying to the Career Progression Fellow, why you believe that you are a stage in your career that this fellowship will allow you to make that transition into true independence, group leader status, and why now and what ultimately it will lead you towards in your career development, and why it's so important now and from us that you get this award. So really the award is for you to define and to convince our peer reviewers and our scientific advisory board, our interview, that those are the things that make you the most effective applicant for fellowships. It's also really important to emphasize that that these are really flexible, but we're wanting to see people make a genuine transition into kind of fully independent status, and that will require the support of your host institute. So either the one that you're currently in with your fellowship or the one that you intend to go to in the future. And we really want to see in your application a commitment from your host institute in some tangible means, and that's either throughout the duration of the fellowship that you intend to, that you're proposing, or it is in the future when you've finished your fellowship and your host institute continues to support you in your career as an independent group leader. So it's food for thought for everyone considering an application to really take into account and work into your application. But researchers are very different. Researchers' careers are very different and trajectories. So we really kind of want to make this flexible for you to be able to justify why the Career Progression Fellowship is for you, and the applications are set up to do so. So I'd like to begin and bring in our panel members for a bit of discussion. I think we're going to kind of kick off in the area of really looking for, asking the question of what are we genuinely looking for in someone who's making that transition into a group leader status. And seeing as Simon is the only one who's not muted at the moment on the panel, I'm going to come to him first to kind of, from your experience, you've done a myriad fellowships in your time, Simon, in various means and in various cancer types and things like that, CR UK, breast cancer now. What do you see as someone who's, what are the hallmarks of someone on that cusp?
You've got to have a good idea. I know that sounds blindingly obvious, but there has to be the big thing which drives you, the thing which gets you out of bed in the morning as a postdoc and says, I really want to answer this question. It may well be something that is a natural progression from what you're doing at the moment, or it might be something completely new. I think you have to have looked at the problem in a number of different ways. So there is a reason why you do postdoc contracts. You train, you learn, you go and see different ways of looking at the world in different labs and different universities, working for different bosses, and learning different techniques. So you need to be at a position where you have a large toolkit of different ways of looking at the world, and you can bring all of those ideas to bear on the one question. And I think at this stage of your career, it really should just be one question. I think we'll talk in a moment, I'm sure, about some of the mistakes that people make, but I think there has to be one real focus, and you now have the toolkit that you've developed over 5, 6, whatever years of the postdoc that you can really bring to bear on that question.
Thank you. So Michelle, would you kind of agree with that from your perspective, that it's you need to see someone almost like converging upon an area?
Yeah, I think for this type of fellowship, yes, this is not the foundation fellowship. This is the career progression fellowship. And so what it says is in the title. It is, I think Simon's right, that it's somebody who has, developed those skills and has the big question that they want to ask. Because, Simon's exactly right. It's going to have to drive you, but you want to be able to achieve it. And I mean, I can see there's a question in the chat from somebody, not in the chat, in the Q&A, that's related to this in a way, because we have, stipulated that you have to have a foundation in pancreatic cancer research. Okay, so this isn't, you need to have that foundation there. You can, the foundation fellowship was to develop that, but these are for people that have that background, experience in pancreatic cancer research already, and are taking the next step to do the big question that they want to address in pancreatic cancer research. I mean, I think the other thing is that you need to start to be recognized in the field. And if you want to ask me what that means, I would say you need to have already been going to conferences and have networked with people in the pancreatic cancer field, and or potentially already collaborating with key people. This is not an initiation of a collaboration. This should be building on the networking that you've already been doing as your postdoc. This is a progression fellowship. I'll let Seth go next.
I was going to ask Seth, I was going to follow on from that in terms of I suppose it's quite important as well from a scientific advisory board member of a pancreatic cancer charity that you see that they're cut through with pancreatic cancer research at their core, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. Is that, I mean, the whole idea of this, of course, is to bring people in this field because this is a cancer of unmet need, and that there is a paucity of these types of researchers here. But also, I think pancreatic cancer is so difficult. You can't just rock up and then decide to study this one day. And I think, so the point of this progression fellowship is that you already have to have your feet in the water. And that's because it is such a complicated disease. You need to have some kind of background in this disease in order to move it forward. And I would also say, just to echo Simon's comments, is that I think one of the most fundamental thing, that in order to become a PI, is this a really good idea, something that makes you makes you stand out from everybody else. It has to be different, but maybe not that different. Some show some kind of independence, and that could be what Michelle just mentioned through collaborations or networking. And I think another important aspect is really to be passionate about what you're doing. Because this disease is so difficult, you're gonna have to have some optimism and confidence to, when experiments don't work, to keep going, and to be motivated in that way. So because once you start your own lab, once you get going, your enthusiasm and your motivation will also trickle down to the people who are executing experiments with you. So it's also important for leadership to be able to show that what you're doing is that you're passionate about.
I see, and like I suppose you mentioned it really briefly there about like kind of independence and what that means for you. Is like, do you is the fact that a potential applicant has begun to kind of step out and network and begin to establish collaborations enough, or is there other kind of like tangible things of independence that you want to see at this stage for someone genuinely going towards like a group leader status?
I mean, you can show this by a number of ways, I think. So it could be, all the way from small to large. It could be, going to a conference and presenting on your own for an oral presentation, personal invitations based on, your publications. It could be that your PI sent you to the conference in their place. It could be, something smaller that you have published, you're a middle author on some kind of collaborative work. So I think it really varies. Yeah.
And do you think, Michelle, do you think I suppose this is probably a question that we've had a few times from people. Do you need like, do you need the kind of the classic metrics of independence of like, their own funding or things like that, where like, do you feel that is a prerequisite for such a transitionary fellowship, or do you feel like, that they've got, the potential is good enough? It's kind of open, really. I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
So two things. I'm definitely with Seth on the going to conferences and perhaps given short talks or, studying for your supervisor, because I did all those sorts of things when I was a postdoc before I became group leader. And on the bit about funding, I think it's really good at this point to, if you can, have had some evidence of applying for something. And evidence it could be something small, it could be something internal to your university, some seed funding that was going, even a couple of thousand. It just shows, are you capable of, writing even something small? I mean, don't panic if you don't have one. But let's just put those in the category of nice to have. But it can be anything, because if you're really truly thinking about that sort of thing, then you should have been, and you've been talking to your supervisor, and they've been doing the right things, then they might have steered you already in those sorts of directions. But don't panic if you haven't. As I said, I think that the last one is they are good things to have, right?
Yeah.
On that point, Michelle, I think it may well vary between different universities. Lots of people on this call will be from different universities. At Breast Cancer Now, for instance, if you are a postdoc, we allow postdocs to hold project grants in their name, maybe with their boss as a co-applicant.
Yeah.
But not every university will allow that themselves. So we will obviously follow what the university's institutional rules are. So some of you will be sitting on this call saying, there's no way I'm allowed to hold my own grant. I'm still just a postdoc in somebody else's lab. As Michelle says, don't panic. There are other ways of showing your independence. Just to follow on from what both of you have said, I think this issue of independence and being able to show it, I think is possibly one of the key points for this fellowship, and will be one of the reasons why applications fail. And it's absolutely crucial that if you are going to carry on work that is coming out of the lab that you're currently in, that you sit down and you agree with your current boss what they are going to let you take with you. Because there's two mistakes that you can make here. One is that you end up with all of your papers still has your old boss's name on, in which case you're not independent. Or two, and possibly worse, you end up competing with your old boss, and in that situation there's only going to be one winner. So I think it's really important, and I have to say, good scientists are very good and very generous at letting their excellent postdocs take stuff away with them. And I can see Seth and Michelle nodding, and I'm sure you know people in your field whose reputations are great because they are generous with their ideas and let other people take them on.
I suppose it was something, Seth and Michelle, that we saw through some of our interviews and previous process was like, there were some questions around how do you have autonomy, I guess, you know, and it was difficult with the career foundation fellow, but I suppose it's even more difficult when you're, you know, stepping away from that supervisor who's still technically a supervisor, because we still need a named supervisor on this. So is there any kind of thoughts, Seth, on that? Because it was something that came up previously, but just to follow on Simon's point, I guess.
You know, I think there are loads of examples where applicants can write, you know, over the stretch of their career, what they have done, how they have tried to become independent, or, you know, either through different courses or, you know, as we said, conferences, collaborators. There's loads of things that you can do. The key thing for me would be the recommendation letter from the supervisor, because there the supervisor can really detail the conversations that have been had, and the supervisor can say, you know, like, we're doing loads and loads of things, but I'm giving this piece to this person because they're the best person to do that piece of work.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Michelle?
So I have I guess a related, but maybe, sort of take on that, which is, I remember applying for a fellowship when I was doing my postdoc. And I mean, if you've been doing a postdoc for a number of years and you've been in the same field for, you know, like, let's just go for 2 or 3 years, okay, 3 or even more, then you should have, even if you started off doing something with your supervisor, you end up at some point with burning questions of your own, which comes back to Simon, or a burning question of your own. And so there is then therefore you hope that your question is sufficiently distinct from your supervisors, or an offshoot of your supervisors. What you don't want, I think, is to say that your supervisor gave it you. What it wants to be is a question that you want to address. Don't want the supervisor writing in the letter, I'm giving this person this. We want, you know, the supervisor should be able to write, okay, they came up with this question and this is going to be the thing that they're going to pursue, right? So if you haven't already got there, you need to think fast, because, or if it's a derivation of what you're doing, all right, because it's got to be built on a foundation. You just can't start from a stop point. It's got to be built on a foundation of what you've already been doing, which is why this stipulation about you must have already been doing pancreatic cancer research, because, you know, only if it's built on a strong foundation is it going to work, or are you going to get the money?
Yeah, interesting. Just, I suppose that kind of highlights the great need for very clear articulation within the application form and an interview stage of like how, you know, and a genuinely like good articulation of, and that you've really thought about it and articulated that as well. And I think what I wanted to ask as well was around, so we have some specific questions for the applicants for career progression fellows, as we did with the career foundation fellows, on, you know, what are your career ambitions? How does this award genuinely get you there? Do you think that, like, what do you think you need to see in that articulation? Because this is like, we're aware that the career progression fellow nor the career foundation fellow makes your career, but it's a good stepping stone. Like, what articulations do you want to hear in that kind of articulation, I guess? Like, what do you want to hear from them in terms of like, where am I going, and what do I genuinely mean it, and is this award for me, kind of thing? Why is this award for me?
I'll let Seth go first.
Yeah. Admittedly, I mean, this is a tricky piece to write, but people should really, I think they should see it in another way. And I see it in the Q&A that somebody has touched on this, is to think about where it is you want to be. You know, where do you want to sit? What do you want your career to look like? Okay, so obviously these people have chosen they want to be a group leader at a university or an institute. Okay, that's step one. But then after that, what is it you want to be? And so for me, I'm a cancer immunologist. So I thought, okay, how do I get from point A to point B? What do I need to know?
Yeah.
And I wanted to do, you know, I wanted to do fancy mouse models. I wanted to study some weirdo cell type that nobody's ever heard of. So how do I put myself in that position so that I can be an expert in those things? And so I think over the course of your training period, you sort of line yourself up so that when you go to write these things, you say, look, you know, you create a narrative. I've done this and I've been here to learn that. And now I know how to put two mice together to make more mice. So this puts me in a position to answer this question. And at the end of this award, I will have figured this out and I will be the expert in this. So I think that you kind of have to see it in a slightly different way. Approach the career vision and the personal statement, you know, write a story about who you are and where you want to go.
And I think it was quite obvious when they were honestly done as well, when the scientific advisory board went around them as well. So being honest and clear about that really comes through. Sorry, Simon, I jumped over you there.
I was just about to say, just picking up on, completely agree with Seth, just picking up on one thing. Even the decision about I want to be a group leader in an institute versus I want to be in a university, those are actually two quite different things. And even there, you might not want to explain this in detail on your application, but as sort of a bit of advice to you for your careers, you might want to think about that, because they're very different approaches to doing science. We've got scientists who we fund at the Beatson Institute, we've got scientists who we fund at hospitals, we've got scientists who we fund in classic university departments of biology and biochemistry, and you can have three very different careers and very different lives in those. So even something as simple as that is worth working out.
I thought we might change gear a bit and just briefly touch on something, Simon, that you kind of started with around Host Institute, and that I kind of made a point of articulating there, was that we're really wanting to see Host Institutes stand alongside you as we do in these in supporting you for your kind of career transition towards being a principal investigator. Yeah. I suppose, I mean, it's a difficult one, but like, you know, what you know, we say we need to see meaningful and tangible support from the Host Institute, either in the fellowship or after it. You know, what for you, Simon, have you seen that has always stood someone in good stead when we ask that, I guess?
I can give the funder's perspective. I'm sure Seth and Michelle can then talk from the perspective of a host institution themselves. I think the first thing to say is, and Chris, block your ears at this point, but £300,000 might not go very far, especially if you're, as Seth was alluding to, if you're doing lots of mouse experiments or something like that. So if you are going to establish your own group, and for this to be the nucleus, and it will be a fantastic nucleus, but it can only be a nucleus, you're going to need other support. Now, as Michelle says, that might be other smaller grants, but in practice, it's going to have to require some sort of support from your host institution. So clearly, space, access to good facilities, maybe even the opportunity to have master's students or PhD students coming alongside you. Will the university top up your grant? Will the university provide even part of a technical colleague who can help with your experiments? All of these things are opportunities there and then during the fellowship. I think if it's okay, Chris, I might just comment about maybe what happens next, which is another way that a host institution can provide support is to say, well, actually, at the end of this fellowship from this fantastic charity, we will do X. Now, X might be different things. it's highly unlikely that a university is going to say, fantastic, you've got a fellowship, great, we'll give you a job for life. But they could at least write a really strong letter which says, we will give this person a thorough review at the end of that 3 years, and we'll hold open a potential tenure track post, or we'll put them onto this, the stream that we have for doing this. It will differ between different universities. But I think something which says, not just we're looking after you during this 3 years of the fellowship, but actually we're worried about your career path in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Seth, Michelle, I just wondered what you thought. What in your opinion is a meaningful and tangible support from Host Institute?
I think first I'll start by saying, I guess this is a new adventure for the people who are on this call, because they've probably never had to negotiate or talk to the host institution in this context, right? So this is welcome to the world of independent research and negotiating with your host institution, because every time we write a grant, we're always negotiating with our host institution about how they're going to support us, even at our level, because there's more chance, and I'll tell you why, because it's the level of confidence thing. And this is why it's good to have it here, because this is what happens in the future. When you apply for a CR UK grant or an MRC grant in the future, or anything in the future, having support from your host institution, whether you're a senior lecturer, reader, or professor, is essential, because it shows that they support you. So it might be like for like funding, they might do match funding, or they might have PhD students because the grant's for longer, or things like that. And the funder will be looking for, well, if the host institute is confident and will support the application, then it makes them feel more confident, or it might make the reviewers feel more confident as well about the science. Okay, so no one wants to do it, but you have to do it. And I would talk to your whoever your supervisor is or is going to be, and also there's this question about who your host institution is. But I don't know for how many of you, whether it'll be the institution that you're currently in or one that you might go to. But you've got to do this if it's one way you are, you need to find out as soon as possible whether they're going to support you or not, or whether you have to think about another institution, okay? And I do think host support comes in lots of ways. It doesn't have to, universities and institutes are very interesting. They don't like to give cash, so it might be what we call in kind. Whether it is a master's student who could work with you for a year, if you can find one, if you're in a university in that sort of environment, or additional fundings for consumables. But I'll stop there and let Seth comment.
Yeah, what are your thoughts there, Seth?
Well, I was just thinking as you're talking, Michelle, that as an applicant, you need to think about where and what would give you the best support for what you want to do. So if you want to do a certain experiment, what is the recipe for success of that experiment? And then you have to slightly expand that. Okay, and if I want to start my lab, what do I need to do that, and where will I be most successful? So you have to have a more a helicopter view of your work and what you need to. If you need some proteomics and you move to a university that doesn't have a mass spec, then you're not going to be successful in that place. So these are the kinds of considerations that you need to take in, and it's not just for you, but for your team as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's the that's probably one of the bigger differences between those foundation and progression fellows, is that kind of the level at which they're viewing things. I think it's a really good point. Whether you're micro or macro, it kind of changes with your status in your career. I suppose just on reflection of those career foundation fellows and the career progression fellows, especially for yourself, Seth and Michelle. And what do you think I suppose what might be useful for people to understand and in their mind to delineate which area is best for them, which stage of their career? What's the main difference for you between a foundation fellow and progression fellow? In your mind, you'd be like, someone approached you, elevator pitch, you would be like, on that, I would say you're a progression. On that evidence, I would say your foundation. Is there anything in particular where you go, oh, you're in earlier or in your later?
Okay, I'll do my quickie one. Well, I mean, I think it, it's what it says to a certain degree, what's in the guidance, which is you have to have that evidence of already being involved in, and it's what Seth has said about being involved in pancreatic cancer research. So that's box tick 1. You have to be able to show those leadership qualities where and Seth is completely right, because he's done the whole route of, initiating his group in a university or research, and thinking about what it requires. So if Seth was in the elevator with you, it'd be saying, okay, well, what do you need in order to achieve your goals in the next 5 years? So start thinking about that. So I think that's very key. And already, if you can possibly, have that network of people in pancreatic cancer, and that you've been to conferences and maybe given a short talk, at a meeting in that field, because all that builds confidence about that you're heading and you've got the right trajectory.
Just to add to that, a unique research niche. You need to start developing something that's your own. Maybe not have it fully developed yet, but at the end of this award, you should be able to say, I am the expert in this, I am the leader in this.
That's a great point, Seth. A common question that I see on interview panels is, what do you want to be known for in 3 years' time or 5 years' time, or however the length of the fellowship is? You've got to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, I like that.
Chris, can I just
oh, absolutely.
on one? Sorry, just before we move on to other things, just one other thing from Michelle's point about career development and planning. It really is important that you're thinking much longer in your career than just the 3 years of this fellowship. And a really important technical point is to work out where you're going next. Pancreatic Cancer UK cannot provide massive, great senior level fellowships. You are going to be going to institutions like the Beatson, or you're going to be applying for fellowships from Cancer Research UK or the MRC. They will have criteria, and some of them will be, you aren't allowed to have an independent position before you apply for this particular fellowship. So even at this stage, I'd be thinking to the next fellowship ahead and talk to people at the MRC and Cancer Research UK, get your name on their radar and ask them, look, if I take this great fellowship from this charity, is that going to am I going to be eligible for this next step? Is it going to make me ineligible? Can we negotiate on this? What sort of relationship do you need to have with them? I think it's, if you're serious about your career, you need to be thinking at least another step ahead. I had too many people come to me at Cancer Research UK and say, I've done all of these things, now can I apply for a career development fellowship? And I said, no, you're not eligible because you've done this stage already. And they hadn't realized that they would make themselves ineligible for a Cancer Research UK fellowship. So it's worth having that conversation across both funders and thinking about your future career.
Yeah, and I think just to emphasize from the organization as well, that it actually might not be our place to shepherd someone entirely throughout their career with funding from PC UK. That might not be the best thing for your career. So really don't ever rely on a single funder to be able to do that, because we want you to be competitive across all cancer types and condition types. We want you to be competitive at career development levels from the MRC and Wellcome and Cancer Research UK. So I suppose, I would just echo that point. I think it's a really good point from part of the funders, that it's not necessarily looked upon favorably to shepherd someone throughout their career with various sequence of funding.
That's true. I mean, rumor has it there are people working with Pancreatic Cancer UK who also have funding for breast cancer now. So,
don't know about that rumor. I would. We'll move on quickly from that. So, where else I wanted to talk to you guys about was, and I suppose primarily to Seth and Michelle, who you both kind of committed a great deal of time and review to the Career Foundation fellow applications that we had recently. So I was just kind of I wanted to ask you the question, what were your key reflections from a distinct Career Foundation fellow? They're in earlier stage, but there's still some parallels between them. And, the process was like pretty similar for different applicants. But, what were your main reflections from that process that you would like to impart to people coming in for career progression fellows, or really for anyone looking towards fellowships, I suppose? Seth, I'm going to start with you because you were unmuted as I asked that question.
I guess the first thing would be to again to articulate how what you've done in your training, what you've done in your PhD, what you've done in your postdoc or postdocs, how that has set you up to answer the question that you're proposing. And then not only that, as Simon said, look to the future. How will that get you where you want to go? Because I think back to Simon's point, I mean, the funding will end at a certain point, but your career will not. And what we want to see is that the applicant has been looking forward enough to know or just have thoughts about where they want to be, what position they want to put themselves in. I think another key is to make sure that the application is and this sounds obvious, but based on solid data. Really, preliminary data is so important. And it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be large. It could be something that you published in a paper, panel F of whatever it is that you've taken out and said, "Ooh, look at this. My hypothesis is based on this." But it has to be something that is, is really cool, but absolutely solid.
I think that was something that certainly came up. Michelle, do you recognize that? Any additional comments on the reflections you had from the Foundation Fellows?
Yeah, I mean, I think and the same will be for the progression applications. Obviously, there's two parts to it. There is the physical written application itself, and then there is the interview, if you make it that far, right?
Yep.
But the gateway thing is the written application first. And, there was a whole range of all the applications. They went from top notch all the way to not very good. And top notch was very clear question. And then that question dissected into key sub questions or sections. And so everything was laid out very carefully and logically in order, and about how are you going to address each sub question from your main goal, let's say. And the preliminary data, because some people, I don't think, in some cases, some people didn't put any in, and therefore our level of confidence, and remember, these are reviewed externally, not just by Pancreatic Cancer UK, but they're reviewed by international experts in the field across the world. The level of confidence goes down if you don't put any data in, because we're scientists. We don't like to just take your word for it. We want to see the data, right? That preliminary data is key.
Yep.
Because then the level of confidence that what you're talking about goes up, and and that's good. And as I said, there's the application itself, key question, overarching question, and then you'll have your subsections that address specific parts of that question, laid out in a logical order, a narrative that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, if you make it hard for us to read this, we are just going to throw it away. I mean, that's just the reality of it. If it's too difficult to read and we don't understand it, it won't make it through to the interview. And all the reviewers that read it, because we score them all and then look at the scores from external reviews before we decide who to invite to interview, you won't make it that far. So it is absolutely clear. And the other thing is my advice, get some other people to read your application. Today, I read one of my professorial colleagues' applications to a CR UK award. Luckily, it was only the expression of interest, so it was quite short. But they sent it to me and said, "Can you read it, because we want other eyes on it." And I have I have a couple of best mates, one in Newcastle and one in Manchester, and they read my applications before I send them out, way in advance, so that they make coherent sense to somebody else who's a scientist. Okay, So make sure that whether it's your supervisor and other people read your application and that it makes sense.
I would go further, Michelle. I would say don't just give it to scientists in your field. Don't forget that on this panel, well, there'll be a lay summary, but even from the sense of, I don't know, you might be a bioinformatician sitting and listening to this webinar, but the people reading your application may well be immunologists or clinicians, or and for them, a bioinformatics application is about as far away as something about medieval French. I mean, it's that different. So you've got to show it to people who are not immediately in your field, so and see if they understand it as well.
Yeah, the people who read it are not actually, one is sort of directly my field and one isn't. So you're right on that one.
Simon, I wonder if, you've seen a lot of applications through various formats of fellowships and career support. What do you feel is like kind of what gets you back up? What's the recurring issue that you think, like, why are people still articulating or doing this in this way? Like, it could be one of the things we mentioned before, but is there anything like uniquely annoying for you when you see these things?
I think write it well. It's a piece of communication. I completely endorse what Michelle has just said. Another thing is you've got to put contingency plans in. Unless you are an absolute genius and online for a Nobel Prize, you're going to make mistakes and things are going to go wrong. In all my experience of doing fellowships, I've only ever known one person who didn't put contingency plans in. They were so confident that what they said would work first time, and he managed to convince the panel that he was right. And it did work, and he's actually just been made a fellow of the Academy of Medical Sciences about 3 years after finishing his fellowship. So, but he's an exception. You've got to put your contingency plans in. Crucially, and again, going back to Michelle's point about laying out a logical consequence, if you do that and you have this whole stream of things which depend one on another, and the first thing goes wrong, what about the other 15 things in that pathway? What about the other 2.5 years of your fellowship? Where do they go if the first bit doesn't work? Now, going back to Seth's point, it might be that the first bit is actually really firm because it's based on published data or preliminary data, and so you can really demonstrate, this bit's secure. But if it's not, you're really going to have to show what you would do if it goes wrong.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think we all saw it in the Career Foundation Fellows. There is in actually any application for any piece of funding, there's sometimes the work package one falling down and all the rest of the award kind of going with it. Seth, what are your thoughts? Anything that gets your back up particularly?
Well, I think there's two components to these fellowships, right? Or at least two components, maybe three components. You've got the science, you've got the host, and you've got the career vision. And each one of those things you will be judged on. And so each one of those things you have to convince, you have to convince the referees, you have to convince the panel, you are the right person at the right time. So, and back to Michelle's point about having people look over it, have 10 people look at it, and you need to give them a month, right? Everybody's busy. As Simon said, you need to articulate, don't take for granted that someone is going to have read your paper. You need to articulate this succinctly in your grant application and make it accessible to, I know immunology, I don't know drugs like Michelle does. So you're going to have to convince me about drugs, you're going to have to convince Michelle about immunology, and you're going to have to do that for everybody else that's on the panel. So there's a lot of different components that you have to get right.
We've crashed towards the end. I don't think I'm allowed to carry on any further. Holly is probably making that gesture in the other room. So I'll end as we ended the last webinar that we did for the Career Foundation Fellow. I'll let you just have the last word. Any top tips, anything that you would, words of encouragement towards those people, anything last pleas to go into those applications or interviews? Simon, I'm going to start with you first.
Well, I think my top tip will actually answer one of the questions I can see coming up in the Q&A, just to make sure we do answer at least one of those, which is, yes, PPI, patient and public engagement, is really important for grants, particularly if you're applying to a grant for a charity like Pancreatic Cancer UK. That's unforgivable, Chris. I'm sorry.
You'll not be invited back
I
again.
know, that's it. That's my last time on this panel. It's really important for charities like Breast Cancer Now that you do great PPI, and talk to the charity about getting that sort of contact. Find people who can help read your grant, as Michelle says. Recognize that is an audience that you're writing to, and you've got to be able to answer the question, why is this going to help people with cancer? Even if it's a long way off, even if you might need to explain that actually this is visionary, it's distant, it's not a clinical trial which is going to help people now, that's fine. You just need to make the case and make sure you get the right cancer when you mention it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's happened before, Simon, in applications, so don't worry, you're not the first. I would just like to, I suppose, echo that, is that I are always incredibly heartened to see how well our scientific advisory lay members are in terms of their ability to see through and to get to the nub of these questions. They do score and review equally alongside Seth and Michelle and their technical clinical research colleagues. So you've got to get that right as well. So I'd just like to emphasize, and also the kind of researchers are very happy to throw something out if they just don't believe it's relevant to people with pancreatic cancer. So they're quite strong on that as well. So I just wanted to lend my support to what Simon said there. Seth, I'm going to let you kind of deliver your final plea or top tip.
I would say if you haven't done this before, ask for lots of help. Grant writing it's a special skill. It doesn't come naturally, at least not to me. Ask for lots of help from lots of different people. Remember to, justify everything. Look at your budget. Tell us why you need the money. And lastly, if it doesn't work out this time, keep trying, because good ideas will get funded eventually.
That's a nice piece of advice. Thank you, Seth. And Michelle?
I'm going to reiterate what Seth said a few minutes ago, which is having the vision and thinking about the future in terms of this is not, and what Simon said, is not just for 3 years. You need to think longer than that. And yeah, I think, and also it's true about if at first you don't succeed. When I was applying for fellowships, I think it took me 4 goes. But in that time, I honed my skills, or at that point, of how to write a fellowship, because you get better as you go along. So if, and it is, I think we're only funding 3, okay? But you've got to, one thing, you've got to be in it to win it. And if you're going to be in it, do it well, right? Don't do a half-baked job. Do your best. All right, I'll stop there.
No, I think ending on doing yourself justice is a perfect way to end. You're here, so do it well. That's been so interesting. Thank you so much, Simon, Seth, Michelle, for your time and your insights there. I've got to believe that has enriched our viewers and anyone re-watching or watching afresh later on. Thank you again to our panel members. Thank you very much to everyone who logged in and watched or is watching recording. If you need us at all, our research inbox is always open. Please get in contact for any support that you might want in the final few weeks of writing your applications. But for now, Seth, Simon, Michelle, thank you very much, and thank you and farewell to all our watchers. Bye now.